welcome to the Curator's Salon podcast. I'm Geeta Joshi and my guest today is Sarah Jane Moon. Welcome, Sarah Jane.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
I wanted us to talk about your portrait painting, your plans for the coming year, and the recent sort of show with the BP as well. So why don't you give us some background about how you came into art?
I'll try and give you the brief story. Essentially, I suppose as a young person, I always thought I would be a painter and wanted to do something artistic. But coming from a relatively small suburban town in New Zealand, where none of my family had necessarily been to university, I wasn't really encouraged towards the fine arts, I suppose. I was adamant I was going to university, but it was really in a slightly different direction. I did Japanese, English literature and art history, mostly contemporary art history, so New Zealand painting, particularly from 1960 onwards. And yeah, that ended up taking me to Japan. I thought I would be a Japanese scholar for a while. I was in Japan, in rural Japan, teaching English to children under the age of 15 for 2 years. And that was wonderful as a 21-year-old. It was really horizon broadening, I think. It was really crucial experience. And interesting as well, I suppose, in positioning me as a sort of minority or someone on the outside. And I've since then always lived in places that I'm not from. And I think that's an interesting perspective for an artist to have as well. Anyway, long story short, I met a guy in Japan in a martial arts class. We fell in love and he happened to be from Perth. So I ended up living in Perth for a while in Australia and went towards sort of arts writing and curatorial practice. I ended up at UWA, the University of Western Australia, doing postgrad arts writing and curatorial practice, and then ended up working in the arts, managing art galleries, small art galleries, and running visual arts components of various arts festivals. Yeah, so I have all of that experience there, which has really been beneficial. So I did that for a number of years. We ended up moving to Kuala Lumpur and then subsequently London, following job opportunities for him in the oil and gas industry, in fact. And I never necessarily, thought to come to London as a place to live. It was sort of an accident, and I've always thought, I suppose, I've always been open to seeing where life takes you and being open to opportunities. So we ended up in London. I started to work my way back into a sort of arts admin / management place and ended up working at the Royal Drawing School. It was then known as the Princess Drawing School, in the office for a year or so, which was great as well as a way into sort of working in London in the arts. I was slightly frustrated in that it was a relatively sort of entry-level role because I had the experience, but being from elsewhere, didn't have the experience here in London. So I was a bit frustrated with the role and my experience level and then left. And in the summer thereafter, I took a course just randomly on a whim, took a course in life drawing at Central St Martin's. And I hadn't picked up a pencil for, over 10 years. And I also had this feeling, having been so steeped in contemporary visual art at university in a sort of academic way, in arts writing, curatorial practice, I had this feeling that drawing from life in an observational, representational way was quite sort of illicit, and it was old-fashioned, and it was somehow wrong. And it took me ages actually to work up the sort of courage to do it. I felt somehow that it wasn't allowed, or, you have all of those narratives of painting being dead and all of that, when you end up at a university that champions more conceptual art. And so I sort of secretly did this 1 week long summer course. And at the end of that week, I'd really enjoyed it. And my tutor sort of looked around the room as you do and tried to say something nice and encouraging about everyone's work. And she looked at my work and said, "Oh, it looks like from your mark making, you might be good at portraiture." And I whether she was grabbing something out of thin air to say, or whether that was a genuine insight, I don't know. But regardless, I went off and Googled portraiture classes London and stumbled upon the Heatherley School of Fine Art in Chelsea. which is where I now teach, incidentally, but I ended up there doing a 2-year full-time portrait painting diploma, which was amazing, actually. It really, it gave me really solid skills in painting that I was lacking previously. So really, I think I credit it as having taught me to paint, and whether you want to end up painting people, working figuratively, or anything else, it's a really good grounding, actually, for just discovering a facility and a language with paint and becoming familiar with that. So that was 2011 that I finished there. That's the same year that I ended up hiring the studio, which we're now sitting in. So I've been here for the last 8 years since then. And I've been working professionally, taking commissions, exhibiting, doing work with various charities, all sorts of things really, and making a living out of it. I suppose in the beginning I did take on several different kind of casual jobs. I was working at a props factory for a time, just on a casual basis. They'd phone up and say, we've got a week's work on a particular project. And that was interesting because they fabricated work for people like Anish Kapoor and Michael Landy. So that was another sort of behind the scenes look into another element of the art world, I suppose, aspect of the art world. And, I did all sorts of things, including medical transcription, looking after people's kids, occasional work. And in those first few years, that became a less and less important part of what I was doing, and I was able to concentrate more on my own work as sales grew and commissioned work grew, and also as I picked up more and more teaching as well.
And how was that transition from being a student to somebody that actually, wanted to take commissions, really moving, they're quite sort of different things.
Yeah, it was, I suppose at Heatherley's, it's one of the few art schools where we teach very pragmatic skills. So there's not a huge business component, but there is some teaching in terms of how to do your tax return and, problems you might encounter. Definitely, you pick up a lot about how to take on commissions and things. And the way the diploma is structured actually in portrait painting is that over the course of 2 years, you have a studio group of maybe 10 to 15 people, and every few weeks a different professional portrait painter drops in and teaches you the project. And so we were able to ask them all sorts of questions about commissioning and open art competitions and all sorts of things about the business of being an artist, which was really useful. So I was essentially taking commissions before I left the course, actually. And at the beginning, I suppose several of these would have been people who I knew, friends and family who sort of wanted to help me out or encourage me, which is, they're still absolutely perfectly valid, but I think is often the case with artists. And I think, you take the work where you can. And I'm very grateful still to those people who wanted to support me in that way.
Sure. So if your early commissions were friends and family, how do you find newer commissions today?
Well, there's still often people I know in some way, shape or form. My family live entirely in New Zealand, so not so much family, but definitely people I know. I've, had relationships with clients over the last 10 years and they've bought my work consistently, whether it's sort of landscapes or still lifes or portraits or commissions. These days, I suppose I'm starting to get more commissions from people I don't know, which is wonderful, actually, but people who've seen my work in various shows and contacted me directly.
So how do you balance the commissions with, other aspects of your business?
I suppose that's a really interesting question, and I think that's for any artist taking commissions a really important question, because there does very easily become a point where your commission work sort of dominates, it can do, and that can in turn affect how you feel about what you're doing, if you're constantly fulfilling a brief, as it were. So I've learned, I suppose, over the last few years that it's really important to have that balance right. There was a summer a while ago where I had about 8 commissioned double portraits, large paintings on, which was wonderful to have the work as an artist and to know that there's a paycheck at the end of that process. But for me, it didn't leave enough time with my teaching as well. It didn't even leave enough time for me to also be working on my own projects and painting the people I wanted to paint for my own sort of enjoyment or creative fulfillment, I suppose. So I think it's something really worth thinking about. There's also, obviously, when you're in the studio, there's various other things that need to be done. You know, my painting time probably is between 20 and 30% of the entire time I spend on, you know, being a painter, as it were. So all of the marketing, the finances, the transport, the materials, the preparation that goes into work, making proposals, pitching for funding applications, marketing, social media, all of that does take up a great deal of time. And I think many artists probably get to a point where they either outsource that or sort of try and do it differently. But I am very active on social media, on Twitter, Instagram. I have a Facebook page for my business. I also have a mailing list. It's not massive. It's under 1,000 people, but these are people that have bought and collected my work. So it's very useful. And I know that everyone's really busy, so I try not to sort of use that too often, really. But yeah, all of that does take a lot of time.
So I know one of the highlights for 2019 for you was being selected for the BP Portrait Award. How was that exhibition for you?
It's been really amazing, actually. I mean, it was such a highlight of my year that I almost felt like I'd won, minus the 35 grand. But no, it's been really wonderful. The show, was this year from June through till October, and it's now currently in Scotland at the National Portrait Gallery there through until the 22nd of March. And it then goes to the Ulster Museum next year. But it's been such a great thing for the exposure of it, just for the joy of being in the National Portrait Gallery. It's a competition I've entered a number of times, and I've been through to that second stage where you cart your painting along to the warehouse and they judge it there. I've been through to that stage several times and not got in. And historically, it has been quite a, I suppose, photorealist sort of show. Certainly in recent years, I went through a period of, sort of big heads, sort of airbrushed, really immaculately, beautifully painted pictures where you sort of overhear people in the gallery saying, "Oh my gosh, it looks just like a photograph." And as a painterly painter, which I class myself as, you sort of overhear that and your heart sinks, because for me, that's not my intention in painting. My intention is to make something that has an element of gesture and expression. Certainly colour I'm more and more interested in, but I love that physical aspect of oil painting, the grittiness of it and the organic nature of it, the fact it's made up of oil and pigment. I love to see that on the surface, and I love the idea of brushstrokes and mark making. So to get in was it was amazing. And also to get in with a painting that, means so much to me, really. It's a portrait of my friend. We've been friends for about 10 years, Dr. Ronks. Ronks is an A&E doctor at Homerton Hospital. She's an androgynous presenting woman, a doctor, person of colour. She does all sorts of amazing activist work on various levels. She speaks to children a lot about representing and about their ambitions and trying to encourage them towards success in various fields. She fronts Operation Ouch on CBeebies, and she's just got so much energy and life, and I have a huge admiration and respect for her. So that was a painting I made purely because I've wanted to paint Ronks for a long time, and there are so many of my friends and people I know who I want to paint, and it's just about trying to find the time really in my schedule to do that. And every time I saw Ronks out socially, she's always wearing these amazing suits and trainers, and I just think, gosh, I really want to paint you, as well as the work she does. That was also a factor, obviously. But we made it happen, and I suppose that painting was also one of the first times that I'd really tried to be very brave and bold with colour, so really embracing gesture, mark making and colour. Being from New Zealand, I've always loved colour. Anyway, I ended up in the National Portrait Gallery, which was great. They used it on a lot of their advertising, so it was blown up sort of 4 times its natural size in the tube at Charing Cross, which was amazing. We had many photo opportunities in front of it, and Bronx has a huge following of sort of 7-year-olds, kids between 6 and 10, I suppose. So she's recognised everywhere, which is great. And yeah, it was on the railings outside the gallery and just being used a lot, actually. So it was a real thrill. And out of that, I've definitely had a lot of new followers on social media. A lot of people sort of contact me about the work. I've had kids doing sort of GCSE projects and things, getting in touch and, asking about that particular painting and asking about how to be a painter and all of that, which is amazing. And I've had people directly contact me and commission me from it. So I was commissioned to do 2 large paintings in New York, directly off the back of the BP. These are people who were visiting London and were in the gallery and saw the painting and sought me out online, got in touch. They've flown me to New York to take photographs for these portraits of them and their families. So I'll be working on those over the next few months. But yeah, it's been really amazing on many fronts, and it's been a really positive experience for me. And I suppose the other thing that was good timing, I suppose, was at the beginning of the year I had already planned to do an exhibition of portraits in November as a follow-up to an exhibition I had in March of still life work and landscape painting. So this was to be the portrait show. So I'd started planning that from about January this year. And it was at the department store in Brixton, which is an amazing venue, now home to Squire and Partners Architects. So the interior is absolutely beautiful. It's a big space, and my paintings are mostly very large, so they need that sort of space. And the idea was to combine recent portraits with commissioned work. So I was borrowing a lot of paintings back, and other work that had sold, which I borrowed back as well. So I had 18 large portraits on display for about 12 days there, and that went really well as well. It was an awful lot of work because the gallery is essentially a space for hire. They were very supportive, but they don't necessarily mobilise their mailing list and that sort of thing. So all of the marketing, again, all of the press releases, all of the the invitations, the posters. I made a book to sit alongside the show. All of that was down to me, as well as painting the paintings and installing the show and physically transporting things. And I also made sure to be in the space every day. So I was there right throughout, apart from Wednesdays when I teach. And I had various tours. I did artist-led tours on the weekend. I also painted in the space as another draw to kind of get people through, to maintain that momentum through the show. And have people come and visit, and I was really really pleasantly surprised. We had about 200 people through at the private view, and typically with exhibitions 95% of people come to the private view, and then you're sort of things kind of trail off. But I was really impressed with the number of people that made the effort to come and chat. And also I had a film playing. There's a film about my work, a short film by Lois Norman called She Is Juiced. It's 15 minutes and it's me in my studio chatting to camera. It's also really lovely interviews with people I know at various exhibitions, people who I've painted, people who've commissioned my work, talking about the work. So that was also playing in the gallery, which was a really nice introduction to the work.
That's fantastic, actually. There's so many different ways of, like you say, drawing people in, but also it's quite insightful what you're saying about quite how much work that took to put on your own show. I just wanted to ask about your painting, because that exhibition did actually display work that had, that really showed an evolution of your style from a tighter style to, something more looser that you're doing now. Can you talk a bit more about that? Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose... around 2015, 2016, my style was, to describe it on a podcast is probably difficult, still quite colourful, but quite literal, I would say. So people sitting generally with a lot of background paraphernalia, a lot of objects, a lot of narrative, you might say. So, excuse me, many of these objects would have particular symbolism, particular narrative impact in the painting, and would be painted with quite small brushes
really, up close, hours and hours and hours of work, and quite graphic as well, so quite flat in terms of the paint on the surface of the canvas. And I've always thought of myself, I suppose, as a more gestural, expressive painter, and that was certainly coming through in my landscapes during that time. But I think through wanting to have sort of control over the painting process, things were getting quite tight. Yeah, and I wanted to loosen up and bring some of that expression of that I found in the landscapes through into the portraits. And so recently I've really been deliberately trying to do that. I did take a step back from commissions to kind of facilitate that, to just allow myself to sort of see what would happen without the pressure of a deadline and a client's expectation. So I have moderated the number of commissions I take on now. It's much less than before, essentially. So I've found a balance that works for me. And yeah, really trying to, as an artist, maintain space within my working week, month, year to push myself and explore what it is I want to be doing in terms of my own creative expression. So my portraits have become much more painterly, much more sort of expressive. It's not that I sort of like them any better than the older ones. They're just different, and they're trying to get to a different place, I think. So it was really interesting having the show at the department store and seeing everything together. That was the first time I've ever seen that number of my paintings together at once. Because here in my studio, which isn't large, I can potentially see two things at once, really, and not from a great distance. So this was a real treat to be able to sort of look around and see similarities, commonalities between the work and how things have progressed. And also to get the feedback from people who came to the exhibition as well. So I had a lot of people say I was very interested in feet and shoes, for example, and obviously the details of clothing, that sort of thing. That hasn't changed at all. But what has changed is the treatment of the background, if you want to call it that, I suppose. So I'm using sort of much more colourful, expressive, gestural sort of marks. The backgrounds are sort of entirely made up these days, really. And they support the figurative work in the portrait. And I see as well, I think that probably will continue to evolve. I'm looking as well to begin doing more narrative-based work, so still working with the figure, but still continuing my portraiture alongside, but also trying to push to a more narrative, figurative space that has elements, I suppose, of abstraction within it.
That's interesting. What does that mean for you, for narrative? Because I only know your work as actually having a sitter rather than telling a story.
Yeah, so that's what it's been historically. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Actually, it's really exciting because it hasn't happened yet. But I am working on a number of large paintings that are sort of playing around with this idea. But rather than, most of my portraits are people quite formally posed, which I quite like. I tend to paint people from the queer community, lesbian, gay, trans people, friends of mine, not exclusively, but when I have the choice, that's where my work tends to go. And I like this aspect of kind of a formal portrait with the sort of quirkiness sometimes of how people present themselves. So that's kind of important, I think, politically in my work. But I suppose in terms of narrative, it's about still working with people, so still working from photographs, but people doing something. So it's not so much a portrait of a particular person, but perhaps like a film still or something, but an action being carried out, or maybe there's a theme to the painting, and the people in the painting are sort of exploring that. I have various sort of themes and ideas that I'm working towards, but most of them haven't happened yet. So,
and who are the influences that you're looking to for that sort of work?
Yeah, very much. Well, there's so many people like, in terms of portraiture, Alice Neal. I love people like Jenny Saville in terms of the way she handles paint. I like very much. I just recently saw, while I was up in Edinburgh, actually, for the private view of the BP Portrait Award, went out to the Modern Art Gallery there and saw the Paula Rego show, which was previously at Milton Keynes. So in terms of narrative, Paula Rego. And starting with an idea, for example. So she has that series about abortion, for example. I don't know if my work would be quite so literally sort of themed around an issue or a campaign or an idea. But her work involves people, but is not portraiture.
We're coming up to the end of 2019. What are your plans for the year ahead?
It's always an interesting period of reflection for me, actually, especially as well coming from New Zealand and having the school year, the academic year finish now, and that's sort of ingrained in your head in childhood. So, I'm interested in trying to sort of actively plan my year a bit better in a way that works for me. I've just yesterday took some paintings down from an exhibition at the Mel Galleries called Art for Youth, which is in support of the charity UK Youth, and I have a number of sort of group shows scheduled in for the beginning of next year, in a few weeks, including the family portrait at Thompson's Gallery in Marylebone, so I'll have a piece in that. We have a staff show at Heatherley's at the Bankside Gallery, and I'll have something in that. The West Norwood Picture House now has a gallery space, so I'll have a number of prints there from January through till April. And there's a number of things like that coming up. Terence Higgins Trust will do a charity auction in Christie's, and I'll donate something to that. So there's all of those sorts of things happening, as well as the teaching. But going forward, I really want to try and look at what I take on in terms of my professional workload and really think about what works for me in the best possible way. And I suppose I'm starting at the moment to work towards 2 solo shows. I'm imagining one will be at the end of next year, perhaps November, and the other perhaps midway through 2021. So it's about, these paintings working on such a large scale and having quite a busy professional life. Otherwise, they do take a while to finish, and working on new work over time does require a bit of planning in terms of that. And what I'm really trying to do this year is put those projects first, which as a freelancer in any industry is quite difficult when you're used to saying yes to everything. But what I've found this year is that between all the teaching, the charity work, the smaller group exhibitions, all of those things, are wonderful to do in terms of building a network. But I really do want to sort of focus and kind of block off time to spend on making sort of larger work, a body of work that I will exhibit at the end of the year, and trying to work a bit smarter around that and have less sort of interruptions, I suppose. And I suppose that's what I'm doing at the moment, scheduling my year. I'm leaving 2 months before the exhibition to concentrate on the marketing and the press and everything, because I enjoy doing that. It's not that I don't, but when I'm trying to be here painting, it's such a different mindset that it becomes quite difficult to, and everything has to happen at once. And I really want to, having done the department store show, I was painting up until the week before the show, as well as doing the invites, the marketing, everything. So I really want to this time, just learn from that and schedule the time for all the things that you think you'll do around the painting, but actually take it's a proper job doing all of the marketing, press and all of that, and making a book. All of that takes a lot of time, so I'm trying to be a bit more smarter about that.
When you get clients coming to you to commission a portrait, they've probably seen your work, whether it's in exhibitions or at the studio. What kind of freedom do you get when it comes to, how that portrait is painted in terms, like we're just talking about, your style has evolved over the last few years. And, are they picking and choosing, or are you sort of dictating like, well, this is how I work now and this is, what you can expect?
Yeah, I suppose it's the latter. It's always a delicate negotiation, a commission, and the commissioning process, I think, is really interesting, and it can be really fraught. I think it sort of tethers me to the world in quite a grounded, sort of useful way. I think working with people is really, it's interesting. It's kind of a collaboration in some senses, but my process generally is that I meet with a person, maybe we'll have brunch or something if I don't know them very well. I try and spend as much time as possible so that I can get a sense of who they are and what kind of picture they would like. And then I take photos over an hour or two of people in different outfits, different positions, different places in their home or wherever it's going to be set. And I do try in that initial part of the process to gauge their expectations. I tend to work pretty much solely on my own in the studio without necessarily showing them updates or progress shots or anything at all. So that initial meeting for me is really important in terms of, if there's something they don't like, I'd really like to know then. So, I also ask people how they feel about themselves, what they would like to come across, if they have anything they feel self-conscious about, because as a painter, that's the last thing you want to do, is sort of really emphasize their ears if they're not that, if they feel self-conscious about them or something, you would hate that. So I do try as much to have an honest, frank conversation like that, and also to think about colour. I'll try and ask them why they've chosen me. I don't necessarily paint particularly flattering pictures of people in terms of portraits. I suppose they're dynamic, energetic, colourful, and they tend to be the reasons people come to me to commission work. And I try and ask them, obviously, practical things about where it's going to go, what kind of size. I'll always go larger, generally, if I can. I like to paint on a large scale, but people don't always have the space for that, so I'll always ask the maximum dimensions. But otherwise, that's pretty much it. And then I will show them at the end of the process. If they're unhappy, which does occasionally happen with an aspect of the painting, they might say, everything's great, but I wish that you'd got my mouth right, or whatever it is, I suppose likeness is one thing. As a portrait painter, likeness is something I'm absolutely interested in. But yeah, if there's something they would like changed, I will try and address that, because you do, someone who's being paid to make a painting, you do want to keep your client happy. They're going to live with the painting, and you want them to have something they enjoy on the wall. So generally, I've had that happen maybe once or twice out of perhaps, about 50 commissions. And it's just a discussion then, and I'll do whatever I can to ensure someone is happy. I did have a friend of mine who's a painter say, and she works to commission much more often than I do, and she said that she'll do that 3 times, and then thereafter she charges by the hour, and that's very clearly set out in her terms. So there are all sorts of different ways to handle that.
That is absolutely fascinating. Sarah Jane, thank you so much for taking time to talk to me today. It is always good to talk to you. Where can people find you online?
So I have a website that's sarahjanemoon.com. I'm on Instagram at Sarah_Jane_Moon. And I have a Facebook page at Sarah Jane Moon Art.
Amazing. I will add all of that into the show notes. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
The Curator's Salon hopes you enjoyed this production.